meeting to order at 3:03. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call.
Director Thielke,
Here.
Director Daddy.
Here.
Director Sticks. Yes.
Here.
Director Chair Hages.
Here.
I said Director Daddy.
Yes, you said.
And Director Finch, is he here?
No.
Or is it Director Ayala?
No. Okay, next item, public comments. Are there any public comments on items that are not on our agenda? Now would be the time to do that.
Hey, Richard, this is John Whaley. Can
Yes.
you hear me? I just have a question, comment. The last meeting, there was some discussion about a person wanting to put in a well on a piece of property that they were going to use for agriculture or livestock reasons. I think they were talking about a half acre. And they already have water to the property. And I'm just curious about if water's there, why would there be a need to put in a well? And I know there was talk about if it's less than 2 acre feet, but my concern is if you have 100 people start doing that or more, then where does that leave us?
Yeah, I would assume the reason that they wanted the well is because they probably have Casitas water, which is a lot more expensive. I'm just assuming that. And you're right, there is some point where we're going to have to deal with that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay, director's announcements. Peter.
Just to share that we got 2.2 inches of rain in the last week up at the top of our canyon. Brings our annual rainfall to a little bit over 5 inches. So good news.
Bob?
Nothing from the community facility district.
I don't have anything from Casitas. And our general manager's not here. Jordan, you're up.
Thank you. Let me get over to the Zoom. Those of you who are watching at home might see me twice here, because what we'll do is we'll zoom into this as well as be here in person, just because that's the simplest way to get to share these presentations when we're here present. So let me share this and get started. All right, so today's presentation I titled Recover, Recharge, Relax. I think that was actually transposed a little bit when I started this, but if we think about the way the basin operates, it's first we see some recovery when pumping starts to cease, and then recharge comes along in the winter storms. And then finally, we can relax, at least for a minute. Oftentimes, that's in the presence of an exhale that we might do as basin levels rise and there's water in the basin. But one of the things that the wells do is actually exhale themselves. That is, the compression of air above a water table in a well can actually eject that water with such force. It seems like the well is breathing. So it's a way of thinking of the basin being alive. As Director Thielke mentioned, there's been a little bit of rain. We've gotten 2.68 inches on the valley floor, and on the ridge, which is above Senior Canyon and the gauge that you guys monitor, we're at 6.05 inches for the water year to date. That's since October 1st, 2022. And what's interesting is that that's a little more than double what we see on the valley floor, which is sort of the rule of thumb. And Well, we're still very early in the season, and this is relatively low precipitation to date. It is interesting that it is more than double because we've seen such low temperatures. And part of that is, the benefit of that is both the orographic effect of the storms that are hitting us, and because of the low temperatures, irrigation seems to be a little bit less overall within the basin, which means a little less pumping, hence the recovery. Recovery versus recharge, it's worth noting, recovery is the effect that happens to the water table within a well or a small basin like this as pumping ceases, whereas recharge is the precipitation and infiltration and then percolation of fresh water to the basin itself. So what does that do specifically here? Here's the key well, just this graphic. You can kind of see there just to the far lower right how we've sort of hit our nadir, it would appear. And that peak that you see there at the far right end of this graph is the showing of a rise in water levels following reaching that nadir in early November. Exactly when that was about November 4th, when the water level was about 196.45 feet below ground surface there. It's come up a tick since, 194.29 being the depth to water as of last Friday when we measured this. And that puts the basin at about 59% capacity, or around 48,800 acre feet. We're below our 2001 nadir by a good 6 feet or so. That's to be expected given the slower precipitation and the like. Hopefully we get more water this year and these things rise up. On the more detailed scale, you know, I love sharing this graph, and part of why I like it now is because we actually were able to get some precipitation and flow in San Antonio Creek and Montgomery Creek right here in our last measurement last week, where we have a little bit more than 0.2 of a CFS flowing out of the basin in San Antonio Creek. It's not a lot, but it certainly is. If we look at the pulse of where precipitation was, the timing of the precipitation, that early November storm, we started to see the effects on the main portion of the basin about a month later. So that time delay of when it rains, we get that initial storm, we see that basin response about a month later. Whereas the shallow southwest uppermost saturated zone, or SWSI, aka perched aquifer, tends to see that response much more rapidly, as does San Antonio Creek. So when we have a precipitation event, the shallowest aquifer gets that response much faster than the main portion of the basin. So you remember what it looked like leaving the basin about a month ago, 2 months ago, and then today, or at least last week, we started to see quite a bit more flow and start to see what's more measurable in terms of that. Not a lot still, not a great amount of storm in those half-inch days, but nevertheless reaching this system and finding its way into the perch system and out of the perch system in this portion of the basin. On the Montgomery Creek side, or the Fox Barranca or Stewart Canyon drain, whatever you call it, there's a lot more flow. This is an area that's almost entirely, the tributary area for this is almost entirely overlying the southwest uppermost saturated zone, bedrock, and a lot more urbanized area. So we tend to see this creek flow a lot faster and more water in these early season storms. And we can actually get actual flow rates. Here's a 3.2 feet per second velocity through that 1 foot wide channel leaving under that bridge. This is another good example of what I like to call proximal sensing and natural intelligence, as opposed to remote sensing and artificial intelligence. Because what we see the county doing is down at Camp Comfort, as we sit here today, they're measuring 3 CFS on San Antonio Creek. That's not happening. Saw a little bit of a spike, and a little bit of spike over the weekend, but not much. And still the prediction or the observation remotely and artificially is that there's some 3 CFS flowing there today. That's not happening. Their forecast, well, we might get some decent rain over the coming weekend. That'd be great. Of course, they're predicting some 14, 15 CFS flowing at that bridge. It's not happening. Down on San Antonio Creek at Old Creek Road, here's another example of this. Their report, as we sit here today, or at least just around noon today when I downloaded this, was that there was 23 CFS at today flowing under Camp Comfort, under Old Creek Road Bridge. Now, I don't think that's true. And if you go there, or at least we were during the last Friday, this is the photograph we took. And that's not 14 CFS. That's not 23 CFS. It's
not
dry.
even 5.
There's no flow there whatsoever. That is under the bridge. I had to get under there. It was, of course, all of, almost pitch black at 5:30 p.m., unfortunately. But you get the idea. And you can see those laser beam raindrops falling in this photograph that we took. So you get an idea about the importance of that natural intelligence and proximal sensing and knowledge versus data, remote sensing, and artificial intelligence. They all have their places in time, but we've got to anchor those models in reality. And that's what we'll continue to do. Questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
That entire system there is erroneous.
Yes, it needs, there's a value in the data it collects, but someone has to reconcile the data that's collected with the radar with actual flow rates. And the county hydrology section does that, but toward the end of the year. So when we wonder what's happening in real time, that's what we're left with.
Is it the equipment that they're using? Is it outdated? Is it obviously they think that the data they gather has some value, but not when it's 1,000% off or,
Right, and I think it's a radar gauge system that's intended for alert, for is there a flood coming? Do we have to notify everybody downstream that them water levels are going to rise and the creek's going to jump their banks, which is probably good when it's 1,000 CFS. But when you're 2 or 3 orders of magnitude below that in reality, or 4 or 5, it's not very valuable data, but it's still presented that way, and that's what is concerning. So take it with a grain of salt if you go to those websites and check that out. Similarly, for NOAA's prediction, you'll see, I like the way this looks because last month, or at least in October, when they were predicting for November, the temperature outlook was above average, and the precipitation outlook was for below average precipitation. Seasonally, similarly, warmer temperatures and dryish to dry precipitation outlook. But today, after another month of data, it's a totally different picture. So you can see how the coldness, the temperature outlook was below average to equal chances of average as opposed to warm, and the precipitation outlook was average to above average in our area, right on the cusp. So just by adding a month of data, even NOAA has taken, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has updated their monthly temperature outlooks and precipitation outlooks, and that's consistent with what we have. Based on this, we would expect that we'd get our December averages for precipitation this month. And if the same holds true going forward for the rest of the year, which it may not, we could expect an average to above average precipitation year. To recycle that through, that was a month ago. Add a month of data and information, and the picture looks a lot cooler and wetter, just with that information.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with the stream flows, they may recently have gone through and adjusted some of those dry season flows, but historically they really never did that because they weren't interested. No one was. So a lot of these models are based on poorly calibrated dry season measurements.
Right, and again, it's meant for, is there a problem? Do
Right.
folks got to put sandbags on their houses?
Right.
And chances are you know that because you can tell it's raining, but sometimes that alert system allows for the public emergency systems to trigger. One of the things that we have noticed about that gauge at the Old Creek Road Bridge is that when it's functional, all of the alluvium has been culled out of that channel. When that happens, all the flow is actually present in San Antonio Creek as surface flow. Right now, with the last year's storms and the year before depositing a lot of gravel and alluvium in that area, there's a buried channel there that still has water in it and may have a good amount of flow to it, but it's all subsurface.
Yeah.
Still flowing in a known or defined channel with bedrock only 5 feet below that, but no surface expression of that flow.
Yeah, that's why there really isn't any good automated way to make those kind of measurements. You almost have to go out in the field to do it.
You would, I think if there was a way to do it, it would be with networked data loggers in a network of 3 monitoring wells or 2 monitoring wells that go through that alluvium, which then wipe out $10,000 worth of infrastructure every time we get a decent storm. So I think they go with the radar gauges that are hanging from the bridges and call it good and correct the data later on.
Any more other questions? Any questions from our audience? Okay, thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item are action items. And we have Dudak going to provide us with an overview of the grant proposal.
Yeah, let me share screens here. Alrighty, can everyone hear me okay and see the PowerPoint slide on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, great. Well, it's nice to see everyone after a little bit of a break. As Chair Hayes just mentioned, I'm going to give a really brief overview of the current status of the Prop 68 grant that we have been supporting the agency in the development of. It's going to be high level. We've discussed the grant pretty extensively at this point. We've provided a few different memos documenting the project components and the costs associated with them. I'm going to give an update today on what the timeline looks like because DWR did extend the grant submittal timeline. I'm going to give an update on the project list because based on the discussion at the last board meeting in October, we've added 2 projects and have expanded costs a little bit to be compliant with the grant requirements. And then I'm going to present the project prioritization list. And this one I'll take a couple minutes to discuss because it has implications on funding. This is a slide that has shown up now, I think 3 times in these board meetings. It's just an overview of what's covered by the grant, what the award amounts are. Effectively, all that I want to communicate with this slide was at the very bottom where you see 1 appear one too many times. The grant was originally, the deadline was originally November 30th. At the beginning of November, DWR sent out an email extending that deadline to December 16th. So we now have about 2 weeks left to submit the application. And we're working closely with John to make sure that we have all the components squared away and we're aiming to submit before the deadline itself. So on the 14th or 15th is what we're shooting for to get this thing submitted to DWR. The project list. So here is a breakdown, a high-level overview of kind of everything that's included in the grant application. We have 11 different components that are described in the grant. Each of those components has a cost associated with them. We've previously discussed a total grant application amount of about 1.3 million. That grant amount has increased to 2.2 million, the application. And this is where I want to spend some time to discuss where numbers went, what the cause of the increase is, and to get board's input on. But effectively, line item by line item, I'm not going to discuss in detail unless anyone has specific questions about what has changed, but we've provided a delta in terms of increased costs per component as well as 2 additional grant components that were not previously included in what we were planning to include in the grant application. One of those components is a larger component. That's the annual reporting and monitoring costs. So that would cover the preparation of 4 GSP annual reports and all associated monitoring, annual monitoring to support this, the GSP annual report. So that would be water levels, water quality, stream flow monitoring. Those costs are reimbursable. So based on the board's input at our last meeting, we've included those costs in the grant application. That's about $480,000. And then we've added an 11th component, which is grant administration. Again, that just covers the cost associated with someone meeting all the requirements by DWR to prepare and submit quarterly invoices, status reports, and completion reports. But like I said, I don't want to minimize the fact that the costs have increased by about $800,000. And that's why we have this next slide. So where did those costs come from? Of the $860,000 or so, 580 are associated with the grant administration costs and the annual reporting and monitoring costs. So those are costs that were not, that were identified as something that should be included in the package that we've gone ahead and scoped out. And the scope for the annual reporting and monitoring comes directly from the GSP. All the other components where we see costs increase are incorporating some additional costs that help with compliance with the actual grant itself. So each component, we've added costs for what I'm going to call component administration. So that would be at the component level. So for example, the project where we're installing new groundwater extraction meters. There would be whoever's managing that project component. There's some time in there to prepare quarterly invoices, prepare monthly or quarterly status reports and a completion report, which would then be sent to the overall grant administrator who would aggregate that information and submit the quarterly invoices and quarterly status reports as a whole for the grant to DWR. The second kind of larger component is DWR requires deliverables associated with every task that's identified in the grant application. So if we have, for example, the GDE evaluation that we're scoping out, that evaluation has multiple tasks. For each task, for example, the initial task would be identifying sites to implement habitat monitoring. We've scoped out costs to include a technical memorandum that describes the site selection process, the plan and the work plan to monitor habitat at those locations. So we have included costs to allow for the preparation of these reports and preparation of these kind of formal deliverables with each task that we include in the grant application, in each component of the grant application. And then lastly, we've increased hours a little bit for stakeholder outreach. So this is a component of the grant scoring and grant budget is how outreach is included into this. So we've added some time for meetings and for workshops to allow for increased availability between the agency and local stakeholders throughout the development, communication, and implementation of these projects. And it is, I just do want to note again, we discussed this last meeting, but there's no cost share required. So the costs that we're presenting in the grant application don't directly impact the agency's cost for implementing these projects if funded. And then I think this is the last kind of dense slide. I've shown a lot of tables. I don't typically like to show tables, but sometimes that's just how the way things go. This is a slide we want feedback on all of this if there are questions, but the grant requires us to rank project components in order of importance. And the way that this might come into play is if DWR opts to fund a part of the grant application and not the entirety of the grant application, their funding will basically march down this grant ranking system to meet the total dollar amount that they're willing to fund. So based on our conversations at the last board meeting, at the top of the list, we've included this groundwater extraction metering program, followed by projects that directly address data gaps identified in the GSP. So that would be the development, and the groundwater extraction metering does address the data gaps, some data gaps we've identified in the GSP. But the second highest importance project or component is this GDE evaluation. Then we have included the DMS, which would kind of enhance the outreach and engagement between the OBGMA and public through the incorporation of a DMS into the website and kind of an easier representation of current conditions in the basin that a member of the public can say go to a public interface of the DMS and get some important information. Then we have monitoring and reporting, and we kind of march down the list from there. So that was a very high level overview and rapid fire discussion of what's changed and where we're at. Where we're going to now is we're working with John to request letters of support from agencies that might partner in the implementation of different components. So right now we've talked with John about him reaching out to Ventura County and to Casitas to try and see if they're interested in providing a letter of support for the application, just basically stating that these partnering agencies support OBGMA's pursuit of these funds and recognize that these funds will support implementation of the GSP and long-term sustainability in the basin. And then identifying for the future agencies that we might partner with as some of these components get implemented. And the big deadline looming is December 16th at 10 a.m. We are shooting to get, not shooting, we're going to submit earlier than December 16th at 10 a.m. That's the deadline for the grant application itself. With that, I'm happy to go back to any slide, answer any questions or any concerns, happy to discuss.
Any questions?
I just have a concern. I thought in the past when we came up against a deadline, we had trouble uploading because everybody was uploading their grants. And
Yeah.
it was hard to get through. So are we going to have enough
Lead time.
clearance, I guess, lead time, whatever we need to actually get through to their system?
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is to submit, like I said, the 14th or 15th. So give ourselves a couple of days to start it, to upload the application. We've actually talked with we have a grant team that's been doing kind of the nuts and bolts of the application. And I think that they're planning to start the submittal process early next week, because I know the online forum can be a little bit tricky to deal with. So we are including that buffer into the submittal timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have to have the letters of support with that application?
Yeah, I believe they can be included as attachments. So if the letters of support or the agencies are there to provide those letters of support, it's something that we'd definitely like to get before we submit the application.
Yeah, it may be a little tough because a lot of these public agencies have a limited number of meetings of this month. So
But, yeah.
I know Casitas only has one on the 14th. So
Oh, really? We can coordinate. I'll coordinate with John and talk with our grants team to see what the level of effort of uploading a last minute letter of support like that would be in the process, because I'm not as familiar with everything that goes into uploading an attachment to the application on DWR's website.
okay. Any other questions? Do you need any action on the ranking of the projects?
Richard, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Please? Thank you. And first, thank you, Trevor. This is really exciting work, so I appreciate the work you're putting into it and going after funding. Really exciting. My question is about the fourth component, simulate extreme climate scenarios. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so one of the comments we received from, it was a consortium of NGOs, is that in the GSP, we did not evaluate two climate scenarios that DWR provides to agencies for GSP development. And those scenarios are called the wetter, milder warming scenarios and the drier, extreme warming scenarios. Now, there's no guidance in SGMA legislation or BMPs that these scenarios need to be evaluated. They're just kind of end members of a suite of climate conditions that the state provides for evaluation and incorporation into GSPs. So because we didn't simulate those as part of the GSP, we have in this grant application some funds to evaluate how the basin might respond under those two conditions noted as the wetter, milder warming and drier extreme warming scenarios.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to do a follow-up on that one. This is, track with me if you can. We've been measuring different weather components on a whole bunch of different levels for different things. So example, when it comes to vegetation, we measure frost-free days, hours of below 32 degrees. We have a number of ways of measuring. Do we have different type of heat index averaging by year that is going to go into that component? So many hours above this ambient temperature, so many hours below. Are we going to use any of those measurements in this category?
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't know how that gets built into the global climate models that DWR uses to develop their scenarios. So they have basically taken 10 or 20 different global climate models, have run those under a couple of different scenarios, and they produce these adjustment factors that we can apply to historical climate data. And the adjustment factors are used to change precipitation and temperature, or ET. So the kind of fundamental incorporation of days below freezing, I don't know how that gets incorporated into DWR's simulations. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but unfortunately I don't.
And the reason I bring that up is looking at the NOAA map that Jordan showed us. Depending on temperature, it's going to pretty much change, the results all across the board. So, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Does the board have any problem with the ranking?
None for me.
All right.
Well, yeah, I'd like to see the grant administration moved up a little. It seems to be at the bottom of the deck. I would like to see that much higher because it's a pretty important function.
Yeah. Anything
So we can do that, I guess, but we would want direction from the board on exactly where that lands.
Okay. I don't know. Without it, we can't do the other thing. So
Yeah, I mean, grant administration is down number 11 out of 11.
Is the request, I mean, if DWR says it's important to administer your grant, they could, and they decided to fund $1.7 million worth of the grant, they could tell you to move grant administration up and put extreme climate scenarios on the back burner. There's some flexibility they have in funding per task or per rank.
Yeah, I believe that is the case. I can touch base with our grant team as well and see what I think DWR is not totally, they haven't set in stone how they're going to use the ranking yet. It's all kind of vague. So maybe what I can do is, if the agency would like, or the board would like, grant administration moved up, we can make an initial shot at it and send it off to John for review. And maybe put it up rank 3 or 4 or something.
And before we do that, I'd like some consideration from the board. Number 8, that's 900 acre feet of water that we're entitled to. That's 900 acre feet of water that we haven't gotten. Watershed put out that grant excess of a few $1 million years ago. And somebody correct me, my understanding is that we haven't gotten anything in a half a dozen years out of the San Antonio recharge. 900 acre feet of water is enough water for 2,000 people. And I would think that these spreading grounds would be something that, the water is so limited that we need to start maximizing where we can. And it seems like that is one of the areas that we can get one of the biggest returns on. So I would definitely like the board to think about number 8 being quite a bit higher than it is. I mean, if we look at number 6, which is revise the numerical groundwater map, that's great. But if we put number 8 up there and figure out a way to recharge, that will have a direct effect on 6. So I'll just leave it up to the rest of the board to figure out where that is, but I think that's more important.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to sacrifice one, you could move that comprehensive conjunctive management plan down a little bit. Not sure we really have a good definition of what that's going to be. And it's something we're probably going to be, it's primarily going to be with Casitas, I would assume, and they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting on it. But putting some emphasis on recharge 8 and 9 would probably be worthwhile, especially if we could get those two things going early.
Yeah, we can move those up.
So I'd be all right if you talk to John about it and you guys can come up with something that fits with the discussion you've heard.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Coordinate with John. Thank you, guys.
Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Okay, the next item is a well application, permit application. John has provided a memorandum where he's basically recommending what has to be done to comply with the new rules and regulations. And he wants to send the applicant a letter within the information they need to proceed. Since he's not here to explain it in any more detail, I would recommend we just go ahead and authorize him to notice the applicant of what they have to do to comply. Are you familiar with this at all, Jordan? No.
No, I'm not. The process that John has started to undertake is certainly in the right direction. I think there's a couple blanks that need to be filled in. We provided some input to this boilerplate letter early in October. So I think, let me see, I think he put that into the standards, yes, yeah. So our input was put into this, so we agree with this letter.
All right.
And as far as this individual well permit application goes, I think it seems to meet, to my way of thinking, the intent of N722.
Yeah.
This is a replacement well.
Yes, to clarify, it is a replacement well. All right, and John will take care of it. Send a letter out. Next item is the the instruction is for John to go ahead and send a letter with the information he recommended, and then it's up to the applicant to proceed with compliance or ask us more questions if they need to. Okay, the next is the financial update. And since John isn't here, I don't think we're going to, unless anyone has any specific questions about the information he provided. Pardon me? Oh, yeah,
It's okay, this one
Does it have the account?
doesn't have the same information that this one has. So, I'll look at this one.
okay, go ahead.
Does it have accountant? I don't think that one has the, it does.
Well, I mean, it hasn't changed. I mean, the facts
Not
of the
much,
numbers
no.
are what they are, so.
No, no, we didn't win the lottery or any of that.
I guess one of the things that I would be interested is sometime in the near first quarter, going back and looking at a report we did about 3 months ago, which says we have this amount of people that don't report and this amount of people that don't pay, and see if we're gaining and getting more people to report and those people to pay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We should get an update on where we're at and what the how effective our notices were, and then go to the next step.
Yeah, if necessary. We don't know if they're
Yeah.
necessary because
I'm just learning QuickBooks, how this works. I'm taking over the bookkeeper's job, but I don't think it should be that difficult to show how each customer is paying up to date. They're coming online quicker, I guess. Not sure the exact terms, but we are getting them more statements. People are complying better. It's improving.
and is there a way that, I don't like this word.
Make a report next month to show the improvement. I
Yeah,
don't know if do you want it for each specific for each pumper or just in general?
well, I think what I'd like to know is, if we had 30 people that were a year behind, and maybe now we have 20 that are averaging 6 months behind, something that just actually shows if we're eating away at the problem or if we need to address the problem in a different manner.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's more than, I don't know that there were that many people who historically reported pumpage and paid their fees that were not paying them all of a sudden. I mean, there was some property fallowed, so they may not have been pumping water. But the biggest problem is we have a large list of registered wells out there that we never had.
And they need to pay.
And that's,
They got a minimum.
whether they exist or not, or whether they're in use or not, we really don't know. So I think that's something we're gonna have to address. Part of that grant money is focused on that, but my suggestion, and John started to work on it, but he hasn't had time. My suggestion is we review the wellhead fee, and potentially increase it significantly to cover some of the revenue instead of putting it on use, and put that fee on the tax roll. That way it's automatically collected. And if people want to abandon the well so they don't have to pay that fee, then that's something they can do.
Are you going to require some type of certificate from the health department that the well has been inspected and properly closed?
The county does that.
Ventura County has rules on that.
Yeah, county does that, yes. But, there has to be some way to automatically collect that fee and to discourage people from leaving wells abandoned. And I would guess the majority of them are probably abandoned.
Okay, well, I would second that when the motion
Well, that's
comes.
just my idea, so.
I think it's a great idea.
Going through the tax collection process isn't easy, but it can be done. And I mean, it's like I said, the sewer district collects sewer fees on the tax roll, and it saves a lot of money in administration when you do it that way. I
Okay.
mean, you have to jump through some hoops to do it, but it can be done
But it's just once.
once a year.
It's just,
Yeah,
and then it's on cruise control.
Right, right.
Yeah.
All right, if there are any other questions or comments, meeting is adjourned at 3:50.
Well,
That'd be all of it.